The final item of business today is a members' business debate on motion number 4411 in the name of Jean Urquhart on the role of crofting in the Highlands and Islands. This debate will be concluded without any questions being put. Would those members who wish to speak in the debate please press the request to speak buttons now or as soon as possible. And I now call on Jean Urquhart to open the debate. 7 minutes, please, Ms Urquhart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. It's with real pleasure that I open this debate on the role of crofting in the Highlands and Islands, and I think it's very timely that the Chamber has a chance to put on record its appreciation and support for crofting and the vital link it forms in Scottish agricultural and rural communities. Around 8.4% of the Highlands and Islands population live in crofting households, and the same proportion, I would note, as Scotland makes up of the UK. Crofting and crofters are fundamentally important to the viability of some of our remotest communities. Not only does crofting help support local business, it is also responsible for the production of high health breeding and store stock, which are valued by farms throughout Scotland and are an incredibly important part to our food supply chain. A large part of Scotland's natural heritage and designated sites lie within the crofting counties. For example, almost 70% of the land designated as national nature reserves and more than 60% of the land designated as sites of special scientific interest in Scotland are in the crofting counties. This compares with the overall proportion of area designated at Scotland level of only 2% for NNRs and 13% for SSSIs. While these areas of national importance are quite correctly designated and protected by government bodies, we must not forget that the actual management of them is to a great extent carried out by crofters. We must ensure that crofters are able to continue in this vital role and that they are justly encouraged and rewarded for doing so. The most immediate issue facing crofters is the legislative morass surrounding decrofting. An unintended consequence, perhaps, of the Crofting Reform Act 2010 is that it appears that there is no provision for owner-occupier crofters to decroft their land, and this has led to the Crofting Commission suspending these applications. Inkster's solicitors have suggested that until emergency legislation can be brought forward to fix this, the Government could, under Section 1(3) of the Crofters Act 1993, compel the Commission to process decrofting applications as has been done in the past. I would urge the Government to consider this measure as it continues to work with the Commission to fix this anomaly. Another practical change that would help crofters would be to change the rate of grants for the Crofting Counties Agricultural Grant Scheme. Currently, grants through the SRDP are paid at a rate of 50% to all land managers, regardless of their location. However, crofters in the Western Isles, Shetland and other remote locations naturally face higher costs than those in mainland Scotland as a result of their geography. This fact is recognised by government when they award funding for infrastructure projects such as schools. And given that CAGS has been underspent for many years, raising the rate of grants to 75% would help to increase uptake and encourage some much-needed investment in croft holdings. Positive community development and regulation are fundamental to crofting's future, and I'm aware that Highlands and Islands Enterprise are now working on a new resilient rural communities policy, which will require partner organisations to agree to shared outcomes and activities. Its focus on residency and social and economic development to allow communities to become resilient is to be welcomed. Assisting communities with developments which are ultimately revenue generating is the goal. It is clear, Presiding Officer, that the Crofting Commission and High need to work closely together for shared and mutual benefits. It would be useful to have progress on development included as part of the Crofting Commission's annual report. Of course, crofting is both a collective and an individual venture. However, under the current CAP regime, those crofters who are working collectively and still utilising common grazings have found it difficult to access support for the whole area of land they manage. There has been a significant decline in the use of common grazings, and I would seek an assurance from the Minister that the Scottish Government will look closely at the difficulties being faced by grazings committees in accessing the support they really need. I would also like to highlight the work being done by Crofting Connections in encouraging young folk to think about a future in crofting. This is a project that has had great success in reaching huge numbers of school children across the region and is a positive, proactive project that the Scottish Government is to be commended for encouraging and co-funding. In closing, Presiding Officer, I would like to reiterate the importance of crofting to sustaining the viability of remote communities across Scotland and to urge the Government to continue to listen to and engage with the concerns, both financial and legislative, of the crofting community. At a recent event by the IF project on Feeding the World, there was a quote, and I don't know where the quote originated from, but we were informed by the representative of the Farmers' Organisation from Malawi that agriculture is the mother of cultures. And we're not just talking in the crofting communities about the culture of husbanding animals or land, but actually about much more than that, about seeing communities not only survive, but actually work well in our rural communities. I mean, there have been two reports recently that show a huge amount, a sense of well-being and happiness in Highlands and Islands. And I do ask that the Scottish Parliament, the Scottish Government, really acknowledge or try to understand some of the source of that and why that should be. And I suggest that the crofting, often seen as the bottom of the food chain in terms of Scottish agriculture, really is the key to much that we respect, admire and see as the future of life in Highlands and Islands. So I suggest, Presiding Officer, that for very little money we could have a huge impact on so many livelihoods, and I look forward to hearing the rest of the debate tonight. Thank you.
And thank you very much. I now call on Rob Gibson to be followed by Claire Baker. 4 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And I'd like to thank Jean Urquhart for securing this debate tonight on the role of crofting in the Highlands and Islands. First of all, I'd like to make a comment about the question of the decrofting of owner-occupied crofts. I believe that this can be solved in a short while, and I look forward to the Minister perhaps helping us to understand this issue. But I would point out that some decrofting is good for building houses, for local needs, but some can be bad. And it was part of the regulation process of the 2010 Act to try and make sure that croftland was being used and to make sure that absenteeism and neglect were reduced, and that this Crofting Commission is embarked on that process just now. Now, the promotion of cooperation in crofting is something which is re-establishing the potential that's been there in the past, because common grazing committees used to work together, people helped each other with their harvest and so on, but the more formal aspects of cooperation are necessary in the context of producing the basic foods and getting them processed and marketed. And I think that that's something which HIE, in its new resilience policy, has to focus upon. The Community Land Scotland organisation has helped a huge amount of crofters to make a success of crofting in their whole communities, where there are members of the community who are not crofters as well. And I commend their activities to this debate, because they have taken over the crofting communities, which were sometimes private and sometimes owned by the Scottish Government. And I hope that there are other communities that might look to follow their example. But it's notable that many have been in the Western Isles and far fewer on the mainland in my constituency and elsewhere. One of the issues which crofting requires to focus upon is the ability to process beef and cattle. And the fact that Austria can have over 4,000 abattoir facilities accepted by the EU and the Highlands and Islands have only about half a dozen is something that I think must be redressed. I also was at the Crofting Connections Phase 2 launch in Plockton, and now that has been extended to many more schools. It's welcome to bring young people into that area. But 2 points to finish off with that the current Crofting Commissioners are grappling with. The first is mapping, and that mapping is required by the bill in order that we know what resources that are available. And in the processes where communities have undertaken the exercise, they have a better idea themselves of what their resources are. Now, the duty to report, which is mentioned in the crofter, and was an amendment which I had a hand in myself in this Parliament, has been taken up by them by using the approach of looking at the form of a report from Common Grazings about the health of the community. And indeed, the assessors have looked at this, and what has come out of it is an approach which shouldn't be threatening and people should feel comfortable with, because, as Susan Walker says, as the Commissioner and the Commissioner of the convener of the Crofting Commission, with this approach, there's an opportunity for us to work together to gather the information we need to enable us to raise the profile of crofting with ministers and the Scottish Parliament, and to present a clear picture of the state of crofting, its value and contribution to life in Scotland, and the threats and problems it faces. I fully back that approach, and I believe that crofters around the country see the positive message for that, and I hope that the attempts by other people to describe it as snooping on your neighbours will end, and that this positive attitude to crofting be reflected by many more people, as this debate has shown. Presiding Officer.
Many thanks. Now calling Claire Baker to be followed by Jamie McGregor.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. I am pleased to speak in this evening's debate and congratulate Jean Urquhart for bringing the debate forward. Her contribution revealed a real understanding of crofting communities, not just the challenges they face, but also their resilience and their reason for being. It is an opportune week for this debate, with the food policy discussion taking place this afternoon and CAP reform tomorrow afternoon. Crofters play a vital role in the rural economy and, as the motion highlights, often maintain land in remote areas, contributing to securing population levels in remote communities, support the larger agricultural sector and make a significant contribution to Scotland's environment. There are 3 areas I want to cover in the short debate this evening. Firstly, the motion identifies CAP subsidy as a means of support for crofting communities. The process of reform is ongoing, and we do need to see genuine reform. There will inevitably be winners and losers, but reform provides opportunity to direct support to where it can achieve greater multiple gains. And crofting, with the contribution it makes to sustainable communities and Scotland's environment, has much to be championed. Crofting agriculture is generally agreed to be uneconomic, but at the same time it delivers much more, and CAP reform and the move from historic to area payments in Scotland could give us the opportunity to ensure appropriate support measures are put in place to protect and enhance crofting agriculture. So you have to think about what is the best use of these funds to deliver the greatest benefit to vulnerable rural communities, contributing to their vitality and securing communities when the benefits are often not so easy to measure. Secondly, I want to refer to the issue of RASI, over which Jean Urquhart also has a current motion. And while the lease being returned to the RASI community is welcome, it is for 1 year. It has cost the government 3 times what it accepted as a bid for the rights, and questions remain over how the decision was made. As the land reform legislation passed through the Scottish Parliament, the then Scottish Executive introduced the Estates Charter, and this set out a series of principles which recognise the Scottish Government's role as landowner and the impact that poor decisions can have on the viability of communities. And the recent decision on RASI shooting rights has highlighted the Charter. The Scottish Government have claimed that ministers were not involved in the decision, and even if this was to be accepted, the question remains, why not? This evening's debate is perhaps not the appropriate parliamentary forum for the unanswered questions being answered, but there does need to be parliamentary scrutiny of the decision and the status of the Charter. Finally, the Minister will be aware of growing concern over interpretation of the 2010 Crofting Act, as raised by other members. Guidance from the Crofting Commission has informed owner-occupier crofters that they don't have a legal mechanism to decroft. This is certainly creating great uncertainty. If these problems are being caused by the 2010 Act, steps must be taken to resolve the issue, and the Government must provide clarity on how this situation will be resolved. So in closing, Presiding Officer, I would again like to thank Jean Urquhart for bringing forward this debate and for recognising the importance of crofting to the Highlands and Islands in Scotland.
Many thanks. Now call on Jamie McGregor to be followed by Tavish Scott.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. As convener of our Parliament's cross-party group on crofting, a job I inherited from the true crofters champion, John Farquhar-Munro, I am delighted that the Vice-Convener, Jean Urquhart, has secured today's debate, and I am very happy to participate. It is important that we all continue to highlight the importance of crofting at every possible opportunity. The Scottish Crofting Federation does an excellent job of this, and I also pay tribute to Pam Rodway and her Crofting Connections team for the very good work that they are doing with young people, educating them about crofting and country ways and making the experience for them very enjoyable and informative. Jean Urquhart's motion is to be commended. She is entirely right to highlight the importance of crofters producing high-quality, high-health status animals for farmers elsewhere in Scotland. This was one of the main reasons why I was proud to stand 100% behind our crofters in the two successful campaigns we have fought since 1999 to preserve the crofters' bullhar scheme. And we debated food policy in this chamber earlier this afternoon, and it's my clear view that the crofting sector has a key role in providing high-quality food in this country, and that it can benefit from what will be an increased demand for local food and traceable produce. While there is genuine political support for crofting across the political parties in Scotland, crofters want to see more done by government to assist them through practical, common-sense measures, including support for crofting housing and new entrants. The Croft House grant scheme has not kept up with inflation, and it should be recognised as an efficient way of providing affordable housing in rural Scotland, as it always was in the past. And the current reform of the Common Agricultural Policy is crucial to the future of the sector. We need to ensure that the specific needs of crofters are protected in this reform. I remain concerned and alarmed at the decline of crofting, as demonstrated through continuing reductions in livestock, in cropping and the communal management of common grazings. Securing a much better SRDP programme, including, of course, the successor to its LFAS element, is vital to halting and reversing these declines. Yes.
Minister Paul Wheelhouse.
Grateful to you for taking the member for taking the intervention. Would he agree with me that the decision by the UK Government to not seek additional funding on Pillar 2 in the CAP reform negotiations may have long-term consequences for the availability of funds under Pillar 2?
Well, I don't really have time to talk about that this evening, but I think it's something that obviously we must investigate, and we have to get the best possible deal that we can for our crofters and farmers in Scotland. Pillar 1 payments offer our marginal areas appropriate levels of support. It's important that they do this. It's absolutely vital that the SRDP successor offers user-friendly options that crofters, including common grazing managers and small unit managers, are able to apply for and offer practical benefits. And again, I would say to the Minister, there is a consensus that the current SRDP simply didn't do that for small producers. I wrote to the Government a great deal about that. The very small total approved number of application cases since the start of the SRDP and LMO and rural priorities, compared with the potential number of small holding applicants, demonstrates this very clearly. Too many are simply put off applying by the complexity of the forms and the labour or anticipated time required, or believe that the options are not appropriate for smaller scale producers. Therefore, we're not making the most of the European funds which actually can be drawn down for crofting. Now, time prevents me, I think, from covering so many of the other issues, but I would want to mention the recent controversy over the Raasay crofters, traditional shooting and fishing rights.
That will be briefly then, please.
Well, I think it's absolutely disgraceful that the crofters who held the let were not offered it in front of anyone else. I mean, what was the reason, Minister, that it was taken away from them in the first place? And on that point, since I'm not allowed to go any further, I'll stop and just congratulate Jean Urquhart on bringing forward the debate.
Many thanks. Now Colin Tavish-Scott, to be followed by Dave Thompson.
Thank you very much, Deputy Presiding Officer. Can I too thank Jean Urquhart for giving us the opportunity to debate crofting in the Parliament this evening. Some of my colleagues may have seen crofters on the BBC's Shetland programme last night, but it all turned out they were from Glasgow rather than from home. But there we are. I've got to remember it's a drama, not a documentary. Instead, don't blame the BBC, Mr Gibson. That's a cheap shot. Indeed, the most pressing issue, certainly for owner-occupiers, is the shambles created by the Crofting Commission and the Scottish Government over decrofting. And I want to address that very directly this evening. 3,000 crofters across the crofting counties are now denied the right to remove crofting regulation from their land by the interpretation of the 2010 Crofting Reform Act. I presume during last year sometime, some bright spark in either the Government or the Commission decided to question the decrofting provisions, because I can't find out where else this interpretation came from. Legal experts have now pored over the Act. They have created a legal opening that has allowed the Government and the Commission, joined at the hip on this issue, to stop any further owner-occupier decrofting. And worse than that, there's now legal uncertainty over title to land that has been decrofted since the 2010 Act was passed. I have had crofters, solicitors, house builders and others constantly on the phone since this utter shambles emerged on the Crofting Commission website. I asked the other day for the First Minister to sort it out. When the Nationalists were in a self-inflicted hole over removing the fishing and shooting rights of Razi's crofters, Alex Salmond clearly read the Internal Riot Act. The policy changed within a week. Well, this decrofting fiasco affects far more crofters right across the crofting counties and is a mess that needs to be resolved immediately, as Jean Urquhart, Claire Baker and Jamie McGregor rightly mentioned. It is unacceptable for the Government and the Commission to state, as they jointly did last Thursday, and interestingly that statement was issued after Parliament had finished for the day, that it is now up to crofters to take their own legal advice. That is what the Government said last Thursday night. That's a Yeah, absolutely. Of course I will.
Paul Wheelhouse.
The member for taking intervention. Would you like to correct the record that when he stood up in First Minister's question and questioned whether the Minister had responded to him, I had to actually send him a letter at 10:30 that morning? Mr. Wales, you sent it by email, and I hadn't been in my office because I'd been in a committee serving this Parliament. If he'd wanted to have the First Minister briefed on that, he could have done so. But if you choose not to send me a letter and actually let me know about it, but do it by email, then I don't think much of that at all. And more to the point, I don't think much of the way in which the Scottish Government is handling this on behalf of the crofters I represent in Parliament. And it's about time, instead of casting blame on others, you stood up and did your ministerial job and got this sorted out, because that's your job as a minister. Ministers are there to take decisions, not to blame everyone else for the mistakes of this Act. Now, let me turn on to the whole of this Government's own making. I expect the Minister to use this opportunity today, instead of prevaricating, blaming everyone else, but to say how he's going to sort it out. Is this going to be emergency legislation, or, as Jean Urquhart said, is he going to use the measures that Brian Inkster has pointed out? It's his choice to do that. He can wave his pen at me as much as he likes. It's his job to do that. And the Government needn't expect to turn up in Shetland on the 25th of March at the Highlands and Islands Convention and lecture us about how good they are if they haven't got this sorted out. This is entirely their making. He can tell Parliament how long he's known about this, how long the Government have been sitting on this. Is it 4 months? Is it 5 months? Is it 6 months? How are crofters to get the money back that they are now due solicitors because of the legal uncertainty that has been created? And he'll also need to tell Parliament, and he'll also need to tell lawyers, because the Law Society phoned me about this on Monday, what they're to do with their insurance premiums are now going to go. Are we shaking his head? Well, he should speak to the Law Society instead of shaking his head about these things. The Law Society now say the insurance premiums that lawyers face in small legal practices will now go up because of this uncertainty, because those are practices that are now having to deal with the outcome of this Government's mistakes on this particular bill. There are many crofters across the counties who doubt this Government's commitment to crofting. No wonder after this fiasco and the changes that Jean Urquhart rightly raised about CAGS grants, agri-environmental schemes and the hideous penalties applied to crofters over minor mapping changes. So he has an opportunity to improve that record. No more waffle from the First Minister or anyone else. Crofters want this mess sorted out, and they want it sorted out now.
Many thanks. Now call on Dave Thompson, to be followed by Rhoda Grant.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I would also congratulate Jean Urquhart on securing this debate. Crofting is of particular importance in my constituency, where it is the way of life for many and a vital source of food for a great deal more. The motion highlights the fact that there are over 18,000 crofts occupied by an estimated 10,000 to 12,000 crofting households, which support a total population of around 33,000. Indeed, crofting households account for around 30% of all households in rural areas in the Highlands and Islands, and as much as 65% in parts of my constituency, such as Skye. I believe there are over 3,000 crofts supporting around 9,000 people in my constituency of Skye, Lochaber and Badenoch, which of course also takes in parts of Easter Ross, such as Dingwall and the Black Isle, and also both sides of Loch Ness. It's difficult to get accurate figures, as the information is not held in a way which easily identifies crofts within Scottish constituency boundaries, but it is clear that around 17% of Scotland's crofts are in my constituency, so crofting is an extremely important issue for me. There is never a shortage of issues to deal with in crofting, as the matters just discussed earlier on in this debate about decrofting and RASI indicate. I believe that the Minister handled the RASI situation, a very difficult situation, well, and I'm quite sure there's a bright future for the crofters and the other residents of RASI in the future. Yes?
Jamie McGregor.
I don't wish to be discourteous, but if he thinks that the Minister handled that well, what would have happened if he'd handled it badly?
Dave Thompson.
Mr McGregor will know that, when you're in a situation where legal contracts have been signed, it's never easy to get out of these things. And I think, given the circumstances and the way the Minister dealt with this, and also the South Ayrshire stalkers, I think the resolution to this issue, it was a mistake, the government admitted it, and they put it right. It takes a big government, Mr McGregor, to admit its mistakes and to put things right. Now, I recently had the opportunity to speak at a Crofting Connections event in Ploughton. Crofting Connections, ably run, as Mr McGregor has already said, by Pam Rodway, clearly recognises crofting's value, one part of which is described as follows. Set against major environmental and social challenges, crofting has a unique role to play in inspiring young people to think global and act local, and I would heartily endorse that. Crofting Connections is a vital programme which facilitates links between crofting and the next generation. Through workshops they run, children get first-hand experience of working with the land, and this is vital if we are to help the next generation understand the importance, the fundamental importance of land, including its ownership and its use. In the modern world, with many people living in towns and cities, it's often taken for granted there will be food on our tables. Little consideration is given to the production of this food, or, crucially, the security of supply. If the market was left to dictate that only the most productive areas should produce our food, this would be a disaster for crofting and for Scotland. One of the difficulties we have at the moment in relation to the Common Agricultural Policy is that Richard Lochhead, the Cabinet Secretary, is arguing a case against DEFRA. DEFRA want to have an unfettered market approach. That is their aim. That's where they want to get to. If this happens, it would be an absolute disaster, not only for crofting in Scotland, but for a lot of other agriculture in Scotland. What the Minister must do in his negotiations is ensure that the CAP negotiations really do favour the real less favoured areas, like the crofting areas, as has been said earlier by other speakers. We have to give special attention to the crofting areas with a view to ensuring that payment for these areas accurately reflects their disadvantage, so they can continue to contribute positively to Scotland's environment, economy and food security.
I now call on Rhoda Grant to be followed by John Finney.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can I too congratulate Jean Urquhart on securing this debate, and I think it's a very important debate. Crofting is essential for the Highlands and Islands, not merely because it has a cultural tradition, although it does have a culture of its own, for example, communal working and the sharing of resources and the like. However, its foremost role is that of an economic driver. And the motion draws attention to the contribution that crofting has to food production and indeed to providing affordable housing. The ability of crofting to fulfil these roles is dependent on the right social and political climate, given the natural disadvantage of the area in which it operates, and indeed it's that natural disadvantage that makes it an essential part of the economic mix for the area. There are a couple of issues that I want to speak about tonight, and others have spoken about them previously, but I think they require emphasis. And the first is the fiasco in Razi. It should never have happened. We were told that it was a decision taken without ministerial knowledge. However, the government sets the parameters in which officials operate. And this action was along the lines of the worst excesses of absentee landowners, something Razi had its fill of in the past, and they thought they were in safe hands in the government ownership. That an official thought it would be fine tells you about the lack of appreciation of crofting and indeed the wider needs of the Highlands and Islands coming from the government.
Dave Thompson.
Thank you. Thanks to the member for taking the intervention. I wonder if the member is pleased that the government admitted that it made a mistake and rectified the matter in Razi.
Rhoda Grant.
Indeed, I'm very pleased they admitted to the mistake, but I would take issue that they've rectified the thing in Razi. They have given the crofters a year-long reprieve, and hopefully the Minister will decide after that year-long reprieve that the shooting and fishing rights will remain in local hands at the end of this period.
I'm grateful to the member taking an intervention. I know it's an issue that she cares about greatly. However, to assume there's just a year, we've given a temporary measure a year with a view to having a longer-term community-led solution to the sporting rights in Razi. So I want to give her reassurance that year is not a fixed amount of time. If we have to move it to allow more time for negotiations, we'll do so.
I very much appreciate that intervention by the Minister, and indeed that reassurance that the year is only coming forward with a long-term solution that indeed will put those rights back in community hands where they should be at all times. Can I touch on then the second issue, and that is about the ability to decroft land on owner-occupied crofts, and it's been raised by many others. One of the benefits we talked about for crofting is the availability of land to build affordable housing. However, you can't secure a mortgage on a house if you build on croft land. Therefore, it has to be decrofted. And one of the stated aims of the last crofting legislation was to ensure that crofting tenants, whether they be owner-occupiers or indeed tenants themselves, had the same benefits. But it appears that shoddy drafting has just had the opposite effect. Now, as many other speakers in this debate have said, Brian Inkster has said that the Minister has powers of direction for the Crofting Commission, and he needs to exercise them immediately to deal with this anomaly, because failure to do so means that crofters are going to have to go through the crofts to protect the courts to protect their rights, and I think that is difficult for those who can least afford to do it. It is a problem of the government's own making. Had they not pushed through the legislation so quickly, they wouldn't have made those mistakes. Government backbenchers and committees have a role to hold government legislation up to scrutiny, not just simply to push through what the government is telling them to do. Committees should be leading the charge and making sure that the government is held to account and legislation coming through the committees is right. And this would also be the case with the Razi decision. The committee should be looking at this decision and making sure steps are taken that this cannot happen again in the future, and that local communities have the right to their own land. Government have to learn from these mistakes, not only for crofting, presiding officer, but also for the rest of Scotland.
Many thanks. I now call on John Finney, after which we'll move to the Minister for the closing speech.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer, and thank you to my colleague Jean Urquhart for bringing this debate here. I want to talk about the connection between people and the land, and that's something that's very difficult to put on paper and the world over, whether that's Native Americans, Aboriginal, Australians, and I think it's incumbent on legislators to shape policies that would recognise that. So whether that's the older people of North West Sutherland not wishing to be institutionalised and coming up with models that will retain them in their own area, that link to the land, and that's the case with crofting too. Legislation on land reform has helped, but I don't think parliamentary draftspersons are always capable of capturing the very essence of that relationship. as a native Highlander and former police officer, for instance, can I say that the poaching laws, Highlanders have great difficulty recognising someone who's resident in London for 50 weeks of the year, or a multinational from the Netherlands can own a fish, a wild fish or a wild deer. So it's very important that things have to be relevant. The Highlands has a troubled history connected with land, and women have played a significant role in that, whether that's Marivor, the Battle of the Braes. And, as I say, the crofting legislation and land reform has helped, but as recent events in Harris have shown, we're not quite there yet, and I think attitudes of greed and ownership need to be resolved. Crofting has a distinguished past, and it has to have a distinguished future. The motion talks about being a valuable source of high health status for larger agricultural food producers. And I think, for me, the link to the local butcher is more important than that. We had a debate this afternoon that covered a lot of issues that would affect crofters, and if I can quote some of the things that were mentioned this afternoon: the modern globalised food chain, unsustainable food culture, and the domination of multinationals, corporations, and community-driven initiatives. And I think we would all recognise that the community around crofters is the one that we would want to see promoted. Also, the motion talks about the key role through the production of store animals for the agricultural supply chain. It is about quality, it is about local, and it's vital for this planet that food production and consumption take place as closely to each other as possible. Indeed, that the Scottish Government's food policy indeed recognises that. I'd like to refer to a document produced by the Scottish Crofting Foundation in 2008. It prompted some discussion about indigenous people of the Highlands and Islands. It's a lot of very pleasing radical language. If I can quote from some of the items in it, talks about sustainable local agricultural systems like crofting must be supported ahead of unsustainable agri-industry, which the UK Government would export, along with the environmental consequences overseas. It goes on to say that crofts have a vital role to play, and there's a fear in some quarters that the very idea of crofting was the subject of official hostility. Now, as has been alluded to by other members, most crofters rely on the Common Agricultural Policy subsidies to earn what's a marginal income. And in 2008, there was talk about the less favoured area support scheme, a situation that saw areas like East Lothian and the Black Isle with fine agricultural land being treated the same as the rocky slopes of Harris, as the report talks about. And, of course, the farmers in East Lothian and Black Isle didn't have second jobs. Most crofters do. And in Lochaber, I well remember neighbours in the Forestry Commission having crofts and having time off to work. Some of the other matters have moved on from there. There was talks at that time of efforts to remove the bull hire scheme. That will be retained. I hope that a community use can be made for Knocknagill, the land that's been freed, and ideally a combination perhaps with what's in the existing plan. In the short time left, can I just comment briefly on Rassay? And there's a high level of interest in crofting results from that.
That will be very briefly.
Yes, indeed. Can I just ask people to act with good grace in the terms that Dave Thompson outlined in relation to that? It wasn't an ideal situation. I think the best has been made of it. There's a future for crofting, and thanks for allowing me to take part in the debate.
Thanks very much. We now move to the closing speech. Minister Paul Wheelhouse, 7 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I too congratulate Jean Urquhart on securing tonight's debate on a wide-ranging issues relevant to crofting. It comes as no surprise to me to hear the strong support for crofting and for the benefits crofting delivers for Scotland. The Scottish Government fully appreciates the difficulties faced by crofters in rural and remote areas, and remoteness from markets, higher costs of foodstuffs, fuel, goods and services, and the extra time it takes to access these are all important issues. I'll come on to some of the substantive points that have been raised by members, but firstly I just want to highlight a few points of my own. My recent visit to Barra highlighted to me the appreciation that crofters have of natural environment and the roles as stewards of it, and I think that's a point Jean Urquhart herself made in her opening speech. The key for the Scottish Government is to build confidence within these communities that we trust them to protect the environments in which they live. And we also fully appreciate the social and environmental value-added benefits that high-nature value farming brings. Because of this, we will do all in our power to create and maintain an environment where the crofting way of life has a sustainable future. Regrettably, the sustainability of crofting is being put at risk by current UK Government position regarding cap reform negotiations, given crofters currently depend on €11.6 million worth of single farm payments each year. Crofting tenures predominate in much of the 85% of Scotland's land in agricultural production that is designated as less favoured areas, and which will in future be covered by the new designation of areas of natural constraint. At present, while represented at EU negotiations by the UK Government, Scotland receives the fourth lowest single farm payment per hectare when compared with any other member states, and the lowest in the UK by far. Pillar 2, where Scotland already receives the lowest payment in the EU, again from within the UK, is also key to many crofters involved in conservation farming and vital for agri-environment projects. I was therefore extremely disappointed on behalf of our crofters that the UK Government chose not to argue, as did 16 other member states, for additional Pillar 2 funding. Maintaining coupled payments for those engaged in livestock farming is also essential, and the UK Government has to date taken a different view, despite clear advice to UK ministers from our own Cabinet Secretary on their importance to Scottish agriculture. Rob Gibson raised the point regarding abattoirs, and he is absolutely correct on this. The future of our smaller rural abattoirs will also be of vital importance to our crofters, and the review of food policy outlined by the Cabinet Secretary earlier this afternoon offers an opportunity to address that issue. However, a key part of the future of crofting is tied in with effective regulation and compliance with the duties placed on all crofters, whether tenanted or owner-occupiers. Our main crofting stakeholder, the Scottish Crofting Federation, also feels that... Certainly.
I'm very grateful to the Minister for taking the intervention. Would he agree with me that, that the land which he's talking about, which is the poor land on which the crofters find themselves farming, is greatly disadvantaged by the fact that it's entirely measured by productivity in the past, and that some of the things that the land can now produce, which is, for example, public good, should also be taken into consideration when looking at the value of the land for drawing down payments with regard to areas of natural constraint and other European awards.
Minister?
Well, I'm certainly will take those points on board Mr McGregor makes, and perhaps it's something that we can discuss at a future point. I'm just conscious of time pressing, and I apologise for having to rush on in my speech. The Parliament had agreed to set up the Crofting Register under the Crofting Reform Scotland Act of 2010, and my recent visit to Barra did highlight there would be value in a number of local meetings to explain the mechanism for registering crofts, to ensure that crofters can, under the new register, for the first time have legal certainty on the extent of an interest in their croft. I've asked my officials to ensure local meetings are arranged to assist crofters in understanding the process of and the requirements for registration, and these meetings will take place in sufficient time for groups of crofters to access the 24% reduction in voluntary registration costs that this Government has offered in the first year of registration at a cost of up to £100,000. The newly constituted board of the Crofting Commission, with a budget of £2.5 million per annum, is mainly made up of people who croft themselves, and this is important, as these commissioners are ideally placed to understand the issues around crofting. It is worth also noting that the franchise for elections to the Commission already included 16 and 17-year-olds, a point that's relevant to today's debates. Scottish ministers will look to how we can support the Commission's vision and how crofting can be effectively regulated for the benefit of all. And turning to some of the specific points within the motion, clearly the Scottish Government is committed to providing ongoing support to crofting. The Crofting Cattle Improvement Scheme, situated on the outskirts of Inverness, provides good quality high health status bulls to groups of crofters and has an annual cost to Government of £400,000. This is vitally important in areas where no alternative hiring facility exists, and it is neither practical nor cost effective to keep bulls and overwinter them. This scheme has dual benefits for participants and knock-on benefits for the rest of their communities, and the higher cost is heavily subsidised, and the progeny of those bulls used within the scheme are invariably heavy and attract a premium price at market. As well as providing an affordable means to hire bulls, this Government has proved its ongoing commitment to the scheme in the form of modernising the facility itself to enable it to be safe and future-proofed. And as well as the higher livestock prices achieved by crofters, there are other social and environmental benefits accruing from the scheme. Also related to food production, we are delighted earlier this year to support Phase 2 of the Crofting Connections project, which a number of members have mentioned, as part of our food education programme, with £112,000 for the period to 2015. And the Scottish Government recognised the role that active crofting plays in maintaining the population in crofting counties, and I think that's tying into the point that Jean Urquhart made about the health of crofting affecting the culture and health of those communities. This Government has continued to support this through the provision of grants for the construction and improvement of housing through Croft House Grant Scheme, which is a budget of £2.6 million per annum. However, the nature of crofting has changed, and while some 8,000 crofters are agriculturally active, we should recognise that comparatively few crofts are large enough for sufficient family income to be generated from agriculture alone. And the report from the Committee of Inquiry in Crofting in 2008 recorded that for the average crofter, only about 20% of their net income comes from crofting activities. I think that's the point that John Finney was making about the need for more than one job if you're a crofter. However, the link to agricultural activities is of great importance to the crofting way of life, and the Scottish Government offers our support for that. But I do, in the time remaining, just want to make some references to the points that have been raised, the very substantial points that have been raised on the issue of owner-occupier decrofting. On that issue of owner-occupiers crofters being unable to decroft their land, we recognise that this is a matter of great concern to many members in the Chamber, but also particularly to the crofters. I have already therefore asked my officials to investigate this as a matter of urgency. We are taking legal advice, and I can assure Parliament we are prepared to take any necessary steps to ensure owner-occupier crofters can apply to decroft their land in the same way as tenant crofters and landlords. And if legislative change is required, I would look to this Parliament for support to encourage a smooth passage of that legislation. In regards to the points made by Jean Urquhart in relation to that, the section 1.3 of the Act, the Brian Inkster suggestion, I'm told that the Commission legal advice is that legislation does not provide for owner-occupiers to decroft. They were instructing the Commission to accept the application would amount to them instructing the Commission to act unlawfully. So, effectively, if ministers were to guide the Commission to resume approving decrofting applications, that would be effectively asking the Commission to act unlawfully. Tavish Scott's point in terms of the crofters taking their own legal advice, the Scottish Government has never given advice that crofters should take independent legal advice. The Commission published that advice on the website recently. Rhoda Grant said that we can't build on croft land as it has to be decrofted to secure a loan. The Scottish Government provided legislation on standard securities over tenanted crofts in draft bill in 2009, and crofters did not accept this. The Committee of Scottish Clearing Banks accepted safeguards in draft legislation for crofters to provide standard security over tenanted land. And I would like to ask Tavish Scott if he could clarify where the 3,000 figure he provided in the Chamber came from. Not all owner-occupiers are applying to decroft at this time. Excuse me. The Crofting Commission indicated 179 decrofting directions have been issued, and 59 applications are held in abeyance. So the figure of 3,000 is not one that I currently recognise. And since February, also, when the Crofting Commission published their legal advice, we have been working very hard to try and address it. So that gives him an idea as to the timescales involved. And I am grateful for him raising it with me as a member, but can assure him we are taking it extremely seriously and will address it in due course. And as to RASI, I think there has obviously been a degree of concern expressed in Chamber. I recognise that. I do acknowledge to Rhoda Grant and to others that we made a mistake. It was a mistake which was made, unfortunately, without ministerial involvement. We have taken steps to rectify it, as Dave Thompson indicated, and I can assure the Chamber that that process should not happen again.
Claire Baker.
Can I ask the Minister if the Estates Charter that was established within the Scottish Executive in 2002, is that still a set of principles that the Scottish Government adhere to?
Wheelhouse.
Well, clearly this Government believes very strongly in community ownership of assets and community management of the land. And I want to put that on record today. This Government will be taking all steps we can to ensure that RASI, the community in RASI has full consultation on the future of the sporting rights in Ireland, and to ensure that the whole community has an input to that decision. Hence the decision, as explained to Rhoda Grant, to allow at least a year for the community to arrive at a solution which hopefully will be carried by consensus in the community. Clearly, I hope that gives a reassurance to members such as Claire Baker that we take very seriously the community's interest in management of our estates in this country, and I can assure members that I will be personally taking a great interest in that in the future.
Many, many thanks. And that concludes the debate, and I now close this meeting of Parliament. Thank you all very much.